I'll never forget that night. It was late, almost 9 o'clock, when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet for a Thursday evening in our little corner of Cedar Falls, a suburban town where folks usually waved at each other across driveways and never let the porch lights burn too long. My television hummed in the background, a rerun of a crime show I wasn't really watching, and I was halfway through folding the laundry I'd let pile up on the couch. When I opened the door, my daughter-in-law, Colleen, stood there. Her eyes were red, like she had been crying, but there was no tenderness in her face, only panic. She didn't even look at me directly. Instead, she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clutching Isaiah's small hand like she wanted to be rid of him as fast as possible. "Just for tonight," she blurted, thrusting his backpack into my arms. Her voice cracked, but there was no explanation. She didn't wait for me to ask questions, didn't ask if I was busy, didn't even say hello. Her car engine was still running at the curb, headlights cutting across my front yard. And before I could take a breath, she was gone. Pulling away so fast the tires screeched. Isaiah, my 7-year-old grandson, looked up at me with wide, frightened eyes. His curls clung to his forehead with sweat, his cheeks pale under the porch light. He didn't move, didn't even wave goodbye to his mother. He just wrapped both arms around my waist and buried his face against me. Something was wrong. I had raised 3 children of my own. I had soothed fevers at 2 in the morning, cleaned scraped knees, and held them when their hearts were broken. I knew the difference between a child who was tired and a child who was terrified. Isaiah was terrified. His little body trembled against me like a leaf caught in a storm. "It's all right, sweetheart," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Grandma's here." I led him inside, shutting the door behind us. My house, small and warm, smelled faintly of lavender from the candle burning on the kitchen counter. I set his backpack down near the stairs and crouched so I could look him in the eyes. But Isaiah wouldn't meet my gaze. His eyes darted toward the windows, the walls, the ceiling, as if he thought something might crawl out of the shadows at any second. "Are you hungry?" I asked gently, trying to keep the evening normal. Kids needed routine when the world around them felt shaky. "I can make you a grilled cheese. Or maybe some macaroni. You always liked that." He shook his head. "Do you want to watch a movie? Maybe that superhero one you and Grandpa watched last time." Again, he shook his head. His lips parted like he wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Finally, he leaned in close, so close I could feel his breath against my ear. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice thin and broken, "Mom told me not to tell you what I saw at home." I froze. The kettle on the stove hissed, nearly boiling over, but I couldn't move. "What did you see, baby?" I asked carefully. His little fists clenched the fabric of my shirt. He glanced over his shoulder, toward the front door, as though afraid Colleen might suddenly come back. Then he whispered the words that made my knees weaken and my stomach twist into knots. "Mom said if I told anyone, especially you, the bad man would hurt us." I felt the air leave my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The room spun. "What bad man, Isaiah?" My voice was trembling. He shook his head fiercely, tears pooling in his eyes. "I can't say. Mom said not to. She said it'll make him mad." I wrapped my arms around him, pressing his small frame against me, my heart racing so fast I thought I might collapse. Images flashed in my mind. Colleen's smudged mascara, the way she couldn't look me in the eye, the speed with which she drove away. I had known she and my son David were having problems, but this was something darker. Something dangerous. "Isaiah," I whispered, pulling back just enough to look into his frightened eyes. "You can tell Grandma. You can always tell Grandma." He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a car sped down the street outside. The sound made him flinch so hard he dropped into my lap like he was trying to disappear. He buried his face against me and began to sob, his little shoulders shaking. I held him tight. And in that moment, I knew 2 things with absolute certainty. First, that my grandson had seen something no child should ever have to see. And second, that whatever it was too big for me to handle alone. I stood, still holding him, and walked to the kitchen phone. My hands shook as I dialed 911. Cedar Falls Police Department, what's your emergency? I swallowed hard, clutching the receiver. My voice broke as I answered. My grandson. He just told me something. Something's happening at my son's house. Please, please, you need to send someone. I think he's in danger. The dispatcher's calm, steady voice asked me questions. Our address, names, details, but my mind was a whirlwind. I couldn't repeat the words Isaiah had whispered. Not yet. Saying them out loud would make them too real. By the time I hung up, my palms were slick with sweat, my throat dry. I sank into the kitchen chair, Isaiah curled in my lap like when he was a toddler, and I stroked his hair as I whispered, "It's going to be okay. I won't let anyone hurt you." But deep down, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure at all. Because I knew my son, David. I knew his temper, the way he let pride lead him down dark roads. I knew Colleen too, the way she smiled for everyone else but kept her heart locked away. And now, hearing those words from Isaiah, I realized there were shadows in their home I had never dared to face. The police were on their way. But what if they were too late? What if the secret my grandson carried was bigger than all of us? And worst of all, what if the man Isaiah feared wasn't a stranger at all? I didn't sleep that night. After the police left, two officers with calm faces and clipped voices, taking notes but never quite saying what I wanted to hear, I tucked Isaiah into the guest room. He curled into a ball beneath the quilt I had made 20 years ago, the one with tiny blue squares sewn from scraps of my children's baby clothes. Watching him drift into an uneasy sleep, I realized how much history a house can hold. Every corner of mine echoed with the ghosts of love and sacrifice. As I sat by his bedside, my thoughts drifted backward, unspooling like a film reel I hadn't planned to watch. My name is Margaret Ann Whitaker, though most folks just call me Maggie. 57 years old. Widow. Retired nurse. I had spent most of my life in this very town of Cedar Falls. I wasn't wealthy, never had been, but I had poured everything I had into my family. I used to believe love and sacrifice would always be enough. But somewhere along the way, I realized I had been wrong. When I was 24, I married Richard. He was a quiet man, steady as the earth, a factory worker who brought home calloused hands and tired smiles. We didn't have much, but we built a life brick by brick. Our firstborn, David, came 2 years later. I can still remember holding him for the first time, his cries echoing against the sterile walls of the hospital where I worked. In that moment, I thought my heart would burst. David was my pride and joy. I stayed up nights rocking him, worked double shifts to afford his school clothes, sat in bleachers for every baseball game. I pushed him hard sometimes, too hard maybe, but I wanted him to have the life Richard and I never could. 2 more children followed, my daughters Eliza and Marianne. They were softer than David, less stubborn, easier to guide. But David, he was my first. My whole world seemed to orbit around him. And maybe that was my first mistake. Richard passed away suddenly when I was 43. A heart attack at work. One phone call, and my world collapsed. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor that night, the casserole burning in the oven, my hands shaking so badly I couldn't even hold the phone. David was 20 then, in college on a scholarship. He was the one who flew home, who stood tall at his father's funeral, who gripped my hand with a strength I leaned on. I thought grief would bind us closer. Instead, it carved something sharp between us. David became restless. He dropped out of school a year later, saying college wasn't for him. I begged him to go back, to finish, to build something more stable than the jobs he picked up here and there. But he hardened, his jaw set in that familiar Whitaker way. He said I didn't understand him. Said I pushed too much, demanded too much. And then Colleen appeared. I remember the first time he brought her to Sunday dinner. She was beautiful, no denying that. Dark hair, green eyes that sparkled when she laughed. But there was something guarded about her. Like a wall she carried inside. I tried to welcome her, to fold her into our family the way I had always dreamed a daughter-in-law would be. But she looked at me as though I were competition, not kin. David was smitten. Within a year, they were married. At first, I thought maybe it was just adjustment. But soon, the cracks began to show. Colleen complained about money, about David's temper, about how I was too involved. She wanted space, independence. I understood, at least I tried to. But it hurt when my visits were cut short, when my calls went unanswered, when I was told Isaiah, my sweet grandson, was too busy to see me. Still, I waited by the phone. I baked cookies for birthdays, mailed cards with $5 bills tucked inside. I showed up at Isaiah's school plays even when no one saved me a seat. Because that's what mothers and grandmothers do, we keep showing up, even when it hurts. And Lord, did it hurt. One memory haunted me as I sat by Isaiah's bedside that night. A summer barbecue, maybe 2 years ago. We had all gathered in David's backyard. The air was thick with the smell of burgers and fresh-cut grass. Isaiah had been running barefoot in the yard, chasing bubbles, his laughter ringing out like church bells. But then David snapped. I don't even remember what set him off. Something small, trivial. A tipped-over drink, maybe. His voice thundered across the yard, sharp enough to make Isaiah freeze in place. I remember the way Colleen's face tightened, her hand gripping Isaiah's shoulder just a little too hard. I told myself it was stress. That family's fault. That it was none of my business. But that day, Isaiah didn't laugh again. He stayed close to me, his little hand clinging to mine as though I were his anchor. Now, years later, I couldn't shake the sound of his whisper, the bad man. My stomach turned as I thought of all the ways I might have failed him. Had I been blind? Had I been so desperate to stay close to my son that I ignored the warning signs? I rose quietly, pulled a blanket higher over Isaiah's shoulders, and stepped into the hallway. The house creaked with old age, each sound magnified by the silence of the night. I leaned against the wall, pressing my palm to my chest, trying to steady the pounding of my heart. That's when I thought of my own mother. She was a stern woman, raised in a time when survival meant hard work and little tenderness. She never told me she loved me, not once. But she showed it in the meals she cooked, the sacrifices she made. I had sworn I would be different with my children. I had sworn they would never doubt my love. But now here I was, 57 years old, wondering if all my devotion had done nothing but drive them away. The phone call replayed in my mind, the dispatcher's calm instructions, the way I stumbled over my words. Asterisk, what if the police thought I was overreacting? What if they didn't take us seriously? Asterisk. I returned to the kitchen, poured myself a cup of chamomile tea I never drank, and sat staring at the steam curling upward. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I thought of David as a boy. The way he used to run down the hallway in Superman pajamas, his laughter echoing. The way he once climbed into my bed after a nightmare, whispering, "Don't let the monsters get me, Mommy." And now his son was whispering the same thing to me. Except this time, the monster was real. I pressed the warm mug against my lips, but the tea had already gone cold. Around midnight, the phone rang. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was the police, telling me they had driven by David's house. The lights were off, the place looked quiet. "We'll keep an eye on it," the officer said. His voice was detached, professional. I wanted to scream. Quiet didn't mean safe. Quiet could hide the darkest things. When I hung up, I felt smaller than I had in years. Alone, powerless. But then I glanced toward the hallway, where a soft light spilled from the guest room. Inside, my grandson was sleeping in a bed that smelled of safety, of lavender, of love. And something hardened in me. I had devoted my entire life to my family. I had sacrificed everything. My time, my dreams, my health. I had been ignored, dismissed, pushed aside. But not this time. Not with Isaiah. If there really was a bad man in that house, if my son had allowed something evil to creep into his home, I would uncover the truth. Even if it destroyed me. Because no one, not even my own flesh and blood, was going to hurt my grandson. The next morning, the sun rose soft and golden, spilling across the kitchen table. Isaiah padded in, his hair tousled, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked so small, so fragile, clutching the sleeve of his pajama top. "Grandma," he whispered, "is it safe now?" I knelt in front of him, cupping his face in my hands. My heart ached at the innocence in his eyes. "Yes, baby," I said softly. "You're safe here with me." But deep inside, I knew safety was only an illusion. The real battle hadn't even begun. And when Isaiah finally told me everything he had seen, when the truth spilled out of his tiny mouth, it wouldn't just shatter me. It would change our family forever. The next morning, I made pancakes. Not because I had much of an appetite, I hadn't eaten a real meal since the night before, but because pancakes had always been Isaiah's favorite. I whisked the batter slowly, listening to the steady rhythm of the whisk against the bowl, trying to calm my nerves. The smell of butter and maple syrup filled the kitchen, wrapping the house in a thin layer of comfort I was desperate to maintain. Isaiah padded into the kitchen in his socks, dragging his favorite blanket behind him. His curls were messy, his eyes heavy, but he smiled faintly when he saw the stack of pancakes. For a moment, he looked like a normal little boy, not a child carrying secrets too heavy for his tiny shoulders. "Sit down, sweetheart," I said, sliding a plate in front of him. "Eat as much as you want." He climbed onto the chair, but instead of digging in, he picked at the corner of his napkin. His silence weighed heavier than any words. I sat across from him, pretending to sip my coffee, waiting. Finally he whispered, "Grandma, if I tell you, you have to promise not to tell Mom." My throat tightened. "Why, honey?" "Because she said it'll only make things worse." His small voice cracked, and he stared at the pancakes like they might swallow him whole. I reached across the table, covering his trembling hand with mine. "Isaiah, I love your mom. I don't want to make anything worse. But if something bad is happening, you can tell me. I'll protect you. Always." He hesitated, then leaned closer. "The man comes at night." My heart skipped. "What man, Isaiah?" His lower lip quivered. He shook his head. "I don't know his name. But he's always with Mom. He yells a lot. Sometimes Dad yells too, but it's different." He swallowed hard. "This man hurts people." I held my breath, my mind racing. A stranger? Someone Colleen had let into their home? Someone dangerous enough to terrify a child? "What did you see, baby?" I asked softly, though part of me already dreaded the answer. Isaiah pressed his face into his blanket, muffling his words. "He hit Mom. And Dad didn't stop him. He just sat there." His voice cracked on the last word, and he began to cry. I wanted to scoop him up, to tell him it was all a nightmare, that grown-ups sometimes made mistakes but always fixed them. But this wasn't a nightmare. It was real. I gathered him into my arms, rocking him like I used to when he was a baby. His tears soaked into my shirt. My mind flashed back to David's temper, the sharp words he had thrown at Colleen in front of me. Had it gotten worse? Had he allowed someone into their lives who was violent, dangerous? "Isaiah," I whispered, stroking his hair, "you're so brave for telling me. I promise you, I'll make sure you're safe." But the truth was, I wasn't sure how. Later that day, while Isaiah watched cartoons in the living room, I sat at the kitchen table with my old spiral notebook. I had always used notebooks for everything: grocery lists, bills, even prayers I wrote down when I couldn't sleep. Now I began jotting down what Isaiah had said. "Man comes at night. Hurts Mom. Dad doesn't stop him." I underlined the last line twice. My son, David. The boy I had raised, the man I had trusted, the father of the child now sleeping in my guest room. He had sat by while his wife was hurt, while his son watched. The thought made me sick. I tried to imagine how Richard would have reacted if he were alive. He'd have marched straight over to that house, fists ready, heart blazing with protection. But Richard was gone. It was me now. Just me. I picked up the phone and called the police again. "Ma'am," the officer on the line said, "we understand your concern. But without concrete evidence, there isn't much we can do. Did the boy tell you the man's name?" "No," I snapped, pacing the kitchen. "But he's 7 years old. He shouldn't have to know names. He saw his mother being hurt." There was a pause. "If you believe the child is in immediate danger, you may want to contact Child Protective Services." The way he said it, calm, almost bored, made my blood boil. To him, it was another call in a long line of calls. But to me, it was life or death. I hung up without thanking him. That evening, I called my daughter, Eliza. She lived 2 hours away with her husband and their kids. She picked up on the third ring. Mom? Everything okay? I hesitated. I didn't want to worry her. But the words tumbled out anyway. Eliza. Isaiah's here. Colleen dropped him off last night. He told me something. Something bad. Her voice sharpened. What kind of bad? I lowered my voice, glancing toward the living room where Isaiah was curled up with his blanket. He said there's a man. At night. Hurting Colleen. And David doesn't stop him. There was silence on the line, followed by a sigh. Mom. You know how Isaiah can be. He's sensitive. Maybe he misunderstood. I closed my eyes, pain shooting through my chest. Eliza, he's not making this up. I know when a child is afraid. I know when something's real. Another sigh. All right. Just be careful. Don't do anything rash. But I had already decided. Rash or not, I couldn't sit still. That night, Isaiah crept into my room. He climbed onto the bed without a word, pressing himself against me. I wrapped my arm around him, listening to his uneven breathing in the dark. Grandma, he whispered, I saw blood. My body went cold. Where, sweetheart? On the kitchen floor. Mom was crying. Dad told me to go to my room. But I saw the bad man's boots. They were red. His small voice trembled. I'm scared he's going to find me here. I held him tighter, my heart breaking with every word. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just fragments anymore. This was the truth, raw and undeniable. And if I didn't act soon, the next time Isaiah whispered to me, it might be from behind hospital walls. Or worse. The question clawed at me in the dark. Who was the bad man? And why had my son let him in? By Saturday morning, I knew I couldn't sit still anymore. I had always been the type of woman who acted when something was wrong. Back in my nursing days, hesitation could mean the difference between saving a patient and losing them. And now, with Isaiah trembling in my guest room and whispering about blood and boots, I felt that same urgency pounding in my chest. I dressed in a plain cardigan, the kind that made me look like just another older lady running errands, and slipped my notebook into my purse. Isaiah was content with a stack of Legos at the dining table. I kissed his head, telling him I'd just be gone an hour to pick up groceries. He didn't question me, though his eyes followed me with quiet worry. The truth was, I wasn't going to the store. I was going to David's house. The drive across town was shorter than I expected, but each turn of the wheel felt heavy. The neighborhood was eerily still, rows of houses with trimmed lawns and shutters painted in cheerful colors. But when I pulled up in front of David and Colleen's home, a chill ran through me. The blinds were drawn tight, the grass a little too long, the flower beds overrun with weeds. It didn't look like the home of the boy I'd once raised to mow lawns for the neighbors just to earn $1. I parked a few houses down, heart hammering, and walked the rest of the way. The front porch creaked under my weight. I pressed my hand to the doorknob. It was cold, metal biting into my palm. Locked, of course. I wasn't foolish enough to try and break in. But I walked around the side, moving slowly, glancing over my shoulder to be sure no one was watching. Behind the house, the back gate was slightly ajar. My stomach turned. David had always been particular about closing gates. I slipped inside the yard. The grass was patchy, the patio furniture tipped over as if left in a hurry. I crept toward the kitchen window, pressing close to the glass. At first, I saw nothing but shadows. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I spotted a dark stain on the tile near the refrigerator. A jagged smear, brown-red, like someone had tried to wipe it but hadn't finished. My stomach clenched. Isaiah's words echoed in my mind. I saw blood on the floor. I pulled back quickly, trembling, terrified someone might see me peeking. A rustle behind me made my blood run cold. Mrs. Whitaker? I spun around. It was Martha Jennings, their next-door neighbor, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a nosy streak. She was holding a basket of laundry. Oh, Martha. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. You startled me. She frowned. What are you doing back here? I glanced toward the house, then back at her. Something in her expression told me she already knew more than she let on. Have you seen anything strange lately? I asked quietly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She set the basket down. Strange how? You've lived next to them long enough, I said. You know my son. My grandson. He told me things I can't ignore. Her eyes softened. She lowered her voice. I've heard yelling. At night. Sometimes banging. Once, I saw Colleen out on the porch with a bruise on her cheek. She tried to smile, said it was an accident. But, she shook her head. I don't think it was. My knees weakened. Hearing confirmation from someone else made it all too real. Did you ever see anyone else there? A man. She hesitated. Once or twice. Tall, broad-shouldered, drove a black truck. Not David. He looked mean. Like trouble. My heart pounded so hard I thought Martha could hear it. Before I could ask more, a car turned the corner. Slow, deliberate. A black pickup. I grabbed Martha's arm. Go inside. Now. We both ducked behind her fence as the truck rolled past, its windows tinted, its engine growling low. It stopped briefly in front of David's house, idled, then continued down the street. I held my breath until it disappeared around the corner. Martha whispered, "That's him." When I finally walked back to my car, my legs shook so badly I could barely put the key in the ignition. Back at my house, Isaiah was waiting at the window, his small face pressed to the glass. When I walked in, he ran to me, clinging to my waist. "You're safe, Grandma," he whispered, as though he needed to reassure himself. I kissed the top of his head. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm safe. And so are you." But I wasn't sure how long that safety would last. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, notebook open, writing everything down. Neighbor heard yelling. Colleen seen with bruises. Black truck. Tall man, broad shoulders. I stared at the list, bile rising in my throat. Who was this man? Why was he in my son's home? And how could David, my boy, sit by while his wife was hurt, while his son was forced to witness it? I couldn't stop thinking about the black truck. Something about it stuck in my mind. Years ago, David had a friend, Earl Simmons. Trouble followed him like a shadow. Big man, tattoos down his arms, always driving some loud truck. I hadn't seen him in years, but what if he was back? The thought made me sick. Later that night, I tucked Isaiah into bed again. He clutched his blanket tightly, his eyes darting around the room. "Grandma," he whispered, "what if he comes here?" "He won't, baby," I said, though my voice trembled. "No one will hurt you here." He hesitated. "He knows things. Secrets." My stomach dropped. What kind of secrets? Isaiah pressed his lips together, silent. Then he shook his head and rolled over, pulling the blanket over his shoulders. I sat beside him until his breathing slowed into sleep. But my own mind wouldn't rest. What secrets could a 7-year-old know? What could be so dangerous that Colleen begged him never to tell me? That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, headlights swept across my wall. I froze. Slowly, I rose and peeked through the curtain. A black truck idled at the corner of my street. My heart stopped. It lingered for a long, terrible minute. Then, without warning, it pulled away into the darkness. I stood at the window long after it was gone, my hands trembling. It wasn't just Colleen and David anymore. Whoever that man was, he knew where I lived. And I had the sinking feeling he was warning me to keep quiet. But I couldn't. Because if I stayed silent, Isaiah's secret would stay buried. And buried secrets have a way of destroying families forever. The morning after I spotted the black truck outside my house, I felt like every shadow had eyes. Even the sparrows hopping along the fence startled me. I hadn't been this on edge since the days after Richard died, when every creak in the night made me think I was losing my mind. But this was different. This wasn't grief. This was danger. Isaiah sat at the breakfast table, eating his cereal in small, quiet bites. He looked so fragile in his Spider-Man pajamas, his feet dangling from the chair. I forced myself to smile, though my hands shook as I poured my coffee. "Did you sleep okay, sweetheart?" I asked. He shrugged. "I dreamed about the bad man again." His voice was barely above a whisper. I set my mug down and crouched beside him. "What happened in the dream?" "He was in our house. Mom was crying. Dad told me to go to my room, but I heard the man laughing. And then, he pressed his lips together, his eyes filling with tears. I don't want to talk about it." I stroked his curls. "That's okay. You don't have to right now." But inside, my blood boiled. My grandson's nightmares weren't just dreams, they were memories. After breakfast, I drew the curtains tighter than usual. I didn't want anyone seeing inside. Especially not him. Especially not the man in the truck. Around noon, I ventured out to the grocery store with Isaiah. I didn't want him to leave my side, so I held his hand the entire time, pushing the cart with my free arm. Every time I turned down an aisle, I checked behind me. And when we came out with our bags, my heart nearly stopped. The black truck was parked across the lot. Its windows were tinted, the engine off, but I could feel eyes on me. Watching. Waiting. Isaiah gripped my hand tighter. "Grandma," he whispered, "it's him." I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to move. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's go." We loaded the groceries quickly and slid into the car. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the keys. When I started the engine, the truck's headlights flicked on. I pulled out of the lot, trying to stay calm. My rearview mirror showed the truck pulling out too. "Grandma," Isaiah whimpered, "he's following us." I took a sharp right, then another. The truck stayed close, never too near, never too far. Like a predator playing with its prey. I drove straight to the police station. The truck slowed at the intersection, lingered, then peeled away before I turned into the lot. My body sagged with relief, though fear still coiled tight inside me. Inside the station, I explained everything to the officer at the desk. The following. The truck. The fear in my grandson's eyes. The officer scribbled notes, nodding politely. "We'll keep an eye out," he said. I wanted to scream. Keep an eye out? That was their solution. When I pressed him for more, he gave me a warning. "Ma'am, be careful. If someone dangerous is watching you, don't provoke him. Stay inside as much as you can. Stay inside. Hide. Be quiet." I wasn't built that way. That night, Isaiah wouldn't sleep alone. He crawled into my bed, clinging to me so tightly I could feel his heartbeat against my ribs. I stroked his hair until he finally dozed off. But I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for every sound outside. At 2 in the morning, a noise shattered the silence. A slow, deliberate thunk against the porch. My blood ran cold. Careful not to wake Isaiah, I slipped out of bed and crept to the front window. Pulling the curtain back a fraction, I saw it. The black truck. Parked at the curb, engine off. And on my porch, something lying near the mat. My hands shook as I unlocked the door and cracked it open, just enough to peek. A dead crow lay on the welcome mat, its wings spread wide, blood soaking into the wood. My stomach lurched. I slammed the door shut, locking it, my heart pounding like a drum. Back in bed, I lay awake the rest of the night, Isaiah curled against me, my mind racing. This wasn't just intimidation anymore. This was a warning. And I knew exactly what it meant. Keep quiet, or next time it won't be a crow. The next day, I made phone calls. I reached out to my other daughter Marianne, who lived states away. She listened patiently, but like Eliza, she sounded doubtful. "Mom, you've always worried too much," she said gently. "Maybe you're imagining the worst." "Marianne, there was a dead bird on my porch." I snapped. "That's not my imagination. That's a threat." She sighed. "I believe you think something's happening. But David's always had his issues. Maybe this is just more of the same. Don't jump to conclusions." I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. It seemed no one believed me. Not the police. Not my daughters. Not even myself, some days. But Isaiah believed me. And that was enough. That evening, Isaiah finally opened up more. We were sitting on the couch, the TV humming softly, when he leaned against me and whispered, "Grandma, the man. He keeps something in the basement." I stiffened. "What does he keep there?" Isaiah shook his head, eyes wide. "I don't know. But Mom said I must never go down there. She locked the door. She said bad things live in the dark." The basement. I thought of the dark stain I'd seen on the kitchen floor at their house. The way the neighbor described yelling at night. The bruises on Colleen. Something twisted in my stomach. I kissed Isaiah's forehead. "Thank you for telling me, sweetheart. You're very brave." But inside, my mind was already racing. Whatever was in that basement might be the key to everything. And I had to find out what it was, before the bad man came knocking on my door again. That night, I checked the locks twice, then 3 times. I placed a chair under the doorknob, a ridiculous move maybe, but it gave me peace of mind. Isaiah slept beside me again, his little hand gripping mine even in his dreams. But I couldn't sleep. Not after the crow. Not after the basement. Near midnight, I heard it again. The low rumble of an engine outside. I slipped to the window, peeking through the curtain. The black truck was back. But this time, it didn't just idle at the curb. It pulled into my driveway. Headlights washed across the house, blinding. The engine cut off. And then, silence. Someone was out there. Someone was standing in the dark, just beyond my door. The headlights flooded my living room in a blinding glow before the engine finally cut off. My heart hammered as I stood frozen by the window, peeking through the curtain. The black truck sat heavy in my driveway like a beast that had found its prey. The world outside was silent, too silent. I strained to see movement, but the glass reflected more of my frightened face than what lurked beyond. Still, I knew someone was there. Watching. Listening. Waiting. Isaiah stirred in bed, murmuring in his sleep. I rushed back to him, pulling the blanket higher, smoothing his curls. He looked so peaceful in that moment, his small chest rising and falling, his tiny hand curled into a fist. I vowed right then that nothing would ever touch him. Not while I had breath in my body. Then it came. A slow, deliberate sound against the door. 3 heavy knocks. I froze. My knees went weak, but my instincts screamed not to answer. Whoever was out there wanted to see me afraid. Another knock. Louder this time. I reached for my phone, hands trembling, and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered, calm and steady, asking for details. I whispered that someone was outside, that he had been following me and my grandson, that he was here now. She told me to stay on the line, to remain calm, and that officers were on the way. The knocks stopped. Silence fell. My skin prickled as I waited, phone pressed against my ear, Isaiah sleeping unaware just feet away. Then I heard footsteps on the gravel. Slow. Crunching. Moving around the side of the house. My stomach twisted. I moved quickly to the kitchen, turned off the light, and crouched low. Through the window, I saw the shadow of a man tall and broad, pacing along the fence. He lingered near the back porch, then stepped into the darkness where I could no longer see him. Minutes felt like hours before the wail of sirens finally pierced the night. Red and blue lights danced across the walls as 2 police cars pulled into the driveway. Relief washed over me so strongly I almost collapsed. But when the officers searched, the man was gone. They found no footprints, no tire marks, nothing but the dead crow still on the porch, its feathers stiff with dried blood. One of the officers bagged it, muttering something about intimidation tactics. The other officer asked me again about the truck. When I described it, he nodded grimly. "We've had reports of a similar vehicle around town," he said. "But no one has ever been able to identify the driver. Whoever it is, he knows how to stay hidden." The words chilled me more than the knocks ever could. He knew how to stay hidden. Which meant he had done this before. Which meant he was dangerous. When the officers left, promising extra patrols near my street, I double-checked every lock, every window. But fear still sat heavy on my chest. For the first time, I wondered if I should pack a bag and take Isaiah far away, somewhere no one could find us. Yet something in me resisted. Running would only prove him right. Running would mean giving up. And I was not ready to surrender. The next morning, Isaiah's eyes were ringed with shadows. He had woken sometime in the night and whispered that he had heard the knocks too. I hugged him tightly, promising he was safe. But deep inside, I knew safety was an illusion. Over breakfast, Isaiah said something that made my blood run cold. "Grandma, I think the bad man comes to the house even when no one sees him." I froze. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "He used to come to our house when Dad was gone. Mom would cry after he left. She made me promise not to tell Dad. But I think Dad already knows." The words settled in my chest like a stone. David knew. My son knew something, maybe everything. And he did nothing. I wanted to scream, to pick up the phone and demand answers, but I held back. I needed to think, to be careful. If the man had already followed me this far, one wrong move could put Isaiah in even more danger. That afternoon, I drove Isaiah to the park, hoping the fresh air would give him some sense of normalcy. He played quietly, not like other children who laughed and ran wild. He sat on the swing, dragging his feet through the dirt, his eyes constantly scanning the edges of the field. He was only 7, yet he looked older in that moment, weighed down by secrets too heavy for any child. I sat on the bench, watching, when I noticed it again. Across the street, half hidden behind a row of parked cars, the black truck. My throat tightened. This time, I walked straight toward it, Isaiah's small hand in mine. I was shaking inside, but I forced myself to appear calm. As we neared, the truck engine roared to life, the tires spitting gravel as it sped away. I caught only a glimpse of the driver through the tinted glass. Broad shoulders. A baseball cap pulled low. Isaiah clutched my arm. "It's him," he whispered. That night, I called Colleen again. She didn't answer. I left a message, my voice sharp and desperate. "Colleen, if you're in trouble, you need to tell me. Please. For Isaiah's sake. I know about the man. I know he's following us. Call me back." But the phone stayed silent. 2 days passed without a word. The truck appeared and disappeared like a phantom. I barely slept, barely ate. My entire world shrank to the safety of Isaiah's small body beside me. On the third night, as I tucked him into bed, he looked up at me with those solemn eyes and whispered, "Grandma, the man said he would hurt you if I ever told anyone." The breath caught in my throat. When did he say that? Isaiah glanced toward the window, his lips trembling. "At our house." He looked right at me. "He said I had to keep the secret or you would be gone forever." I hugged him so tightly he squeaked in protest. My mind raced with fury and fear. How dare anyone threaten a child like this? How dare anyone use fear as a weapon against my family? That was the moment something shifted inside me. I was done hiding. Done waiting. Done letting this shadow of a man control my every breath. I would not only protect Isaiah. I would find out who this man was, what he wanted, and why David was silent. And I would end it. But as I lay awake that night, staring into the dark, I realized the question was not if the man would return. The question was when. And when he did, would I be ready? I was done hiding. Done waiting. Done letting this shadow of a man control my every breath. I would not only protect Isaiah. I would uncover the truth. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table long after Isaiah had gone back to bed with his cartoons. I spread out my old leather notebook, the one I used to keep church notes and recipes in. Now it became my war plan. I listed everything Isaiah had told me, everything I had seen with my own eyes. The bruises on Colleen's arms. The dark stain in the kitchen. The basement door Isaiah said was locked. The crow on my porch. The truck. The knocks. Each piece alone was strange. Together, they spelled a story I could not yet read. One thing stood out. David. My own son. The boy I raised, the man I thought I knew. If Isaiah was right, then David was aware of the man. That knowledge ate at me like rust. Why would he let his own wife and son live with a monster? Unless he was involved. I pushed the thought away, but it crept back like a whisper I could not silence. That afternoon, while Isaiah napped, I drove across town to David's house. I told myself I just wanted to check, to see for myself. The driveway was empty, the blinds drawn. I parked down the street and walked the rest of the way, my heart pounding with every step. The house looked the same as ever. But when I reached the porch, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The doorframe was cracked near the lock, as if someone had forced it open recently. I rang the bell. No answer. My stomach churned, but I tried the knob. It turned easily, and the door creaked open. The smell hit me first. Damp, sour, almost metallic. I stepped inside, calling out softly. No response. The living room was dark, curtains drawn, air stale. The rug was rolled up, leaning against the wall, and the floor beneath showed faint reddish stains. My chest tightened. I moved carefully toward the kitchen. The stain I had noticed before was still there, darker now, spreading like a shadow. I crouched, touching the edge with my finger. It was sticky. Recent. My throat closed. I forced myself onward, each step heavier than the last. At the end of the hallway stood the basement door. Just as Isaiah had said, it was locked, a thick padlock glinting in the dim light. I pressed my ear against it, holding my breath. For a moment there was nothing. Then, faintly, a sound. A scrape. A muffled thud. I stumbled back, my whole body shaking. Something was down there. Before I could decide whether to run or investigate further, headlights flashed through the curtain. My pulse skyrocketed. I peered out the window. The black truck was pulling into the driveway. I bolted for the back door, my feet barely touching the ground. I sprinted across the yard, through the neighbor's bushes, not daring to look back until I was safely in my car down the street. The truck was parked in front of David's house now. A man climbed out, tall, broad, baseball cap pulled low. He walked to the porch, unlocked the door with ease, and disappeared inside. My hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly they ached. This was no stranger breaking in. He had a key. He belonged there. I drove home in silence, my thoughts screaming. Isaiah's words replayed in my mind. The man came when Dad was gone. Mom cried. Dad knew. The truth pressed down like a weight I could no longer ignore. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just some drifter. He was tied to my son. That night, Isaiah sensed my tension, though I tried to mask it. He curled against me on the couch, his small body warm, his eyes searching mine. "Grandma," he whispered, "are we going to be okay?" I forced a smile. "Yes, sweetheart. We will be okay. I promise." But deep inside, I wasn't sure if that was true. Sleep was impossible. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking of the padlocked basement, the stains, the man with the key. Thinking of Colleen's silence. Thinking of David's absence. Near midnight, my phone buzzed. A text message. No name, just a number I didn't recognize. "Stop digging. You don't know what you're walking into." My heart lurched. My hands shook as I read it again and again. The words were clear. A warning. A threat. I almost deleted it, almost pretended I hadn't seen it. But instead, I saved it. Proof. Evidence. Something solid in a world full of shadows. The next morning, I drove Isaiah to school, even though every instinct screamed not to let him out of my sight. I kissed his forehead, telling him to be brave. He nodded, though his eyes were clouded with fear. On the way home, I stopped at the library. I knew I couldn't fight this with fear alone. I needed information. Records. Names. Anything. I searched the public archives, pulling up property records for David's house. One detail made my stomach flip. The deed was not in David's name. It was in the name of a man called Raymond Holt. I whispered the name out loud, tasting it like poison. Raymond Holt. I searched again. Police reports, old news articles. And there it was. Raymond Holt had a record. Assault. Battery. Suspicion of trafficking, though never convicted. And a photograph. I stared at the picture until the room seemed to tilt. Broad shoulders. Hard jaw. Baseball cap. It was him. The man from the truck. I left the library with shaking hands, my mind racing. Why was the house in his name? What hold did he have over my son and daughter-in-law? That evening, as I cooked dinner, I noticed Isaiah drawing at the table. His little hand moved quickly, sketching dark shapes across the paper. I glanced down. He had drawn the truck, the house, and a stick figure with a cap, towering over smaller figures. He looked up at me. That's him, Grandma. That's the man who lives in the basement. The fork slipped from my hand, clattering against the plate. I crouched beside him. What do you mean, sweetheart? Lives in the basement. Isaiah's eyes filled with tears. Mom said he stays there when Dad is gone. She said if anyone ever finds out, we're all in danger. The words hit me like a blow. The basement wasn't just a hiding place. It was a prison. Or worse. That night, as Isaiah slept, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the house too quiet, the shadows too deep. I wrote down everything again, every detail, every clue. I knew now that the danger wasn't just outside. It was buried beneath David's home. And if I wanted to save my grandson, my daughter-in-law, maybe even my son, I would have to open that basement door. The thought terrified me. But it also filled me with a strange, steady strength. For years I had been the quiet mother, the patient grandmother, the woman who sacrificed and endured. But now, I was something else. I was a fighter. Still, as the night stretched on, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. That Raymond Holt, whoever he truly was, knew I was close. And if I wasn't careful, the next knock on my door wouldn't be a warning. It would be the end. I was done hiding. Done waiting. Done letting this shadow of a man control my every breath. I was ready to face him, no matter what it cost me. The next morning, I dropped Isaiah off at school with a kiss on his forehead and a prayer in my heart. He begged me not to leave him, his little hands clutching my sweater. I promised I would be there the moment school ended. I promised him everything would be okay. My voice shook when I said it, but I meant every word. I drove straight to David's house. The street was quiet, the house dark. The truck wasn't in sight. For once, the predator was absent. That meant I had a chance. I parked down the block and hurried across the lawn, my heart thundering. The basement door. That was where the truth waited. I knew if I left it closed, I would never forgive myself. Inside the house, the air was colder than before, like it had been swallowed by the earth itself. I moved quickly, my breath clouding in the gloom. The padlock gleamed at the end of the hallway. I had brought a hammer from my car. With trembling hands, I swung. The metal groaned, once, twice, then snapped free. My whole body shook as I pulled the lock away and opened the door. The smell hit me instantly. Damp. Rot. Something metallic. Something human. I descended the creaking stairs, each step echoing in the suffocating dark. At the bottom, a single bulb flickered overhead, casting long, sharp shadows. And then I saw it. A cot against the wall. Chains bolted to the floor. A stained blanket tossed carelessly aside. And in the corner, boxes stacked high, filled with cash, bottles, syringes, and papers I didn't understand. But it wasn't empty. Colleen was there. She sat on the floor, her wrists raw, her eyes wide with terror. When she saw me, she gasped, pressing a finger to her lips. "Margaret," she whispered, her voice broken. "You shouldn't be here. He'll kill you." I dropped to my knees, reaching for her. "We're getting out. Both of us. Right now." Her tears spilled over. "You don't understand. David made a deal with him. He owes Raymond money. He let him stay here, let him use this house, because he was scared. And now we're all trapped." My chest burned. My son. My own flesh and blood. He had traded his family's safety for his pride, for his weakness. I grabbed Colleen's hands, pulling her to her feet. "Not anymore. We're ending this." A sound froze us both. The door upstairs creaked open. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hall. Raymond Holt's voice filled the stairwell, low and mocking. "I knew you couldn't keep away, Grandma." Colleen's grip tightened on mine, her whole body trembling. The footsteps grew louder. My heart threatened to break my ribs. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. Not of David's failures. Not of the dark. I shoved Colleen behind me, standing tall as Raymond appeared in the doorway. His frame filled the space, shoulders broad, face shadowed by the cap. His eyes gleamed when they landed on me. "You should have listened," he sneered. "You should have stayed quiet." I stepped forward, voice steady. "You picked the wrong family." He laughed, deep and cruel. "What are you going to do? Call the cops again? They can't touch me. Your son owes me everything. That means you owe me too." But before he could take another step, flashing lights filled the basement window. The sound of sirens cut through the air. I had called the police before I came, leaving them a message, telling them where I would be, what I would find. They had taken me seriously this time. Maybe the crow, maybe the knocks, maybe my desperation finally broke through. The door burst open. Officers swarmed in, shouting commands. Raymond roared, lunging forward, but 3 men tackled him before he reached me. His cap flew off, his face contorted with rage as they forced him to the ground, cuffing his hands behind his back. Colleen collapsed against me, sobbing. I held her close, my knees weak with relief. David appeared in the doorway moments later, his face pale, his eyes wide. He looked at me, then at his wife, then at the man being dragged up the stairs. Shame flickered across his features, but he said nothing. I stared at him, my voice low but sharp. "You let this happen. You brought him into your home. And you nearly destroyed your son." David's lips trembled, but he had no defense. He simply lowered his head as officers led Raymond out into the daylight. Outside, neighbors gathered, whispering, pointing. The black truck was hauled away, its dark windows finally unmasked. I stood on the porch with Colleen at my side, the weight of years pressing down, the ache of betrayal heavy in my bones. But for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Later, Isaiah ran into my arms at the school pickup, his small body warm against mine. He looked up at me with wide eyes. "Grandma, are we safe now?" I kissed his forehead, tears spilling over. "Yes, sweetheart. We're safe." But safety didn't mean forgetting. David would have to live with the consequences of his silence. Colleen would need time to heal, to find her strength again. Isaiah would need love and patience to erase the shadows from his childhood. And me? I would keep fighting. For them. For myself. For the promise that no matter how dark the night, love would always burn brighter. As we drove home, Isaiah leaned against me, his eyes fluttering closed. For the first time in weeks, he slept without fear. And as the sun set behind us, I whispered to the quiet road, to the memory of the man who thought he could break us. "You lost.